Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy.
Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for tuning into this solo episode about the $1 million fitness question. Should you cut or bulk first? I'm going to give you the tools to make an effective choice if you're new to bulking and cutting, or if you're returning to this endeavor after taking some time off and you need help figuring out your best option. And even if you've been doing this for a while, I'm pretty confident you can still learn a thing or two from these episodes. So, without further ado, let's dive in. The first topic I want to touch on is whether you should cut or bulk at all. And I don't think that everybody needs to enter the cyclical phases of cutting and bulking immediately when they begin their fitness journey. In particular, if you're overweight or have obesity because of excess body fat, you don't need these cycles just yet. What I believe you would benefit from more is to alternate fat loss phases with what I call consolidation phases until you achieve a healthier body fat level for your size. During fat loss phases, as the name suggests, you'll be in a calorie deficit and actively working towards reducing fat. To be clear, yes, this is the same as a cutting phase, but the point is that you're not going to cycle through bulking and cutting phases just yet. You're going to cycle through fat loss and consolidation phases. During consolidation, you'll practice maintaining your new lower weight. You'll enjoy some extra food flexibility by increasing your calories to your estimated maintenance, so you'll no longer be in a deficit, and you'll recharge your motivation when it inevitably starts to dwindle after a few months chasing the goal of fat loss. In order to assess your current body fat level, if you're not sure whether you carry excess body fat, you can use a combination of two tools, your BMI and the waist to height ratio. While I believe that the BMI can provide helpful data for a lot of people, it isn't designed to capture the difference between someone with above average muscle mass and someone with above average body fat. So if you carry more muscle than the average individual of your size, you could be classified as overweight based solely on the BMI, even if your body fat level doesn't pose an actual risk to your health. That's where the waist to height ratio comes in to fill this gap. So if you take the two tools together, you can paint a more accurate picture of your current body fat level and of how it may be impacting your health status. In general, if your BMI falls within the overweight or obese category, and if your waist to height ratio is above 0.5 or 0.5, then you are at a greater health risk due to your current body fat. In this case, that's when I would think you would benefit the most from reducing this body fat first before considering cutting and bulking phases, or rather cycling through these two phases. Now, what if you don't need to worry about your body fat level? What if they are within an average range for your size? You don't have obesity and you're not necessarily overweight either. In this position, my answer used to be, it depends. And that is still true because there are multiple factors involved in the final decision on whether to cut or bulk first. But compared to several years ago, I now have a lot more coaching experience under my belt. And in my experience, most people will likely benefit from cutting first. And I have 5 main reasons why I have this belief. The first reason is that cutting teaches you skills that will bolster bulking too. If you're asking yourself whether to cut or bulk first, it means that you're probably a bit of a beginner who's trying to figure out their training and nutrition. Or at the very least, you haven't trained and or managed your nutrition like this for a relatively long time. In either case, you need to either learn how to cut and bulk effectively, or at the very least, you need to dust off the proverbial cobwebs or metaphorical cobwebs. In order to cut, you're going to enter a small to moderate calorie deficit, which is going to be the smallest calorie budget you're ever going to have. The smaller the calorie budget, the more challenging it is to hit your macros without overshooting calories. So, when you master your macros and your food choices in a cut, it will be far easier to maintain these habits at maintenance calories or in a surplus when you have more calories and therefore more food flexibility. This will vastly improve your future bulks for 2 reasons. The first is that hitting your protein target will become second nature, which will in turn promote faster muscle growth. The second is that sticking to your surplus calories will feel like a walk in the park compared to a deficit, which is going to decrease your chances of overdoing it and of gaining fat too fast, which would then cut your bulking phase short. Pun very much intended. In addition to nutrition related skills to enhance future bulks, you'll also get better at lifting weights with proper form and within close proximity to failure. Gaining this proficiency will help you build more muscle in a future bulk because the greater your training quality, the better the results you'll get from it. And while this is less obvious, being better at training will also lead to less fat gain, not just more muscle. Think of it this way. Let's say that you spend 3 months honing your training during your first cut. Then you bulk and gain 5 pounds, of which 4 pounds is muscle and only 1 pound is fat. On the other hand, let's say you bulk first and gain the exact same 5 pounds, but your training is subpar because you didn't have 3 months of practice under your belt because you didn't cut first, you bulked first. Now, the weight gain may be the exact same 5 pounds, but in the second scenario, you're only adding 3 pounds of muscle and 2 pounds of fat, so you're doubling the amount of fat that you've gained. Of course, these are random numbers. There is really no way to quantify how much muscle you're gaining throughout a bulk, and there's no alternate universe to which you can compare. But my point is that the greater your training skill, the greater the muscle growth you'll be able to accrue. And I know which option I'd rather take. I'd rather be better equipped to make the most of my training in order to make the most of a bulk. The second reason to cut first is that you can lose fat and build muscle at the same time in a deficit if you're new to cutting and bulking. That's when you're likely in a prime position to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously despite being in a deficit. This process, called body recomposition or body recomp, isn't impossible when you're more advanced, but it does get harder and harder. And that's why the more advanced lifters alternate cutting and bulking cycles, because they can no longer gain muscle at a rate that they're satisfied with when they're in a deficit or at maintenance calories. They want to maximize muscle growth and therefore they require bulking and gaining weight in a surplus. I actually recorded a podcast with a client called Sam that I took through a body recomp phase in a deficit a couple of years ago. And that was episode 55, Achieving a Body and Mindset Recomp for Top Surgery. The third reason to cut first is that it gives you the confidence to commit to a bulk. Straight talk here. There is no way to only add muscle mass if you're bulking in a surplus. A little bit of fat accumulation is the so-called price to pay for a faster rate of growth, even when you're doing everything right because you follow my obviously awesome advice. For this reason, many people shy away from bulking because they're afraid of gaining fat, of not being able to lose it afterwards, or both. And that was me. When I say many people, that definitely includes old Nikias or younger Nikias. But if you go through a successful cutting phase, you're going to prove to yourself that you're capable of losing any fat that you might gain in the process of bulking up. This can help you truly commit to a bulk instead of pulling a 2019 Nikias and telling yourself that you are, in quotation marks, bulking, when in fact you're simply increasing calories by a measly 100, and then a week later you're already dropping them back down to where they used to be because the scale went up half a pound and you freaked out. Embarrassing to say, but that was me for a good 6 months after my first cut. But that's why my clients work with me, and that's why you're listening to this podcast. I made those mistakes, those embarrassing mistakes, and I learned from them so that you don't have to. The fourth reason to cut first is that it gives you a kick up the arse. I don't know about you, but when I got to the end of my first cut ever in 2018, I looked at my physique in the mirror and I thought, wow, I'm small. At the time, I'd only been lifting and studying the science of physique training and nutrition for 4 months, so I wasn't totally bought into the concept of a bulk and its benefits just yet. I was also still dealing with some disordered eating thoughts and a fear of weight gain because of the eating disorder that I had suffered from when I was a teenager. This made me even more hesitant to start a bulking phase. However, when I realized how little muscle I actually had at the low body weight that I achieved by the end of that cut, you bet that I was persuaded at last that a bulk was the right move for my goals, because my goals were related to gaining more muscle, and they are still to prioritize muscle growth. At the time, it took me 6 months to get around to bulking properly, but that's also why you hire a coach, so that you don't have to wait that long to get results. I wish that I'd been so wise at the time, but alas. But then again, that's why I'm here now and why you're listening to me. So there's always a silver lining, or at least I like to be optimistic. The fifth reason to cut first is that it helps you bulk for longer. Bulking for a long time is crucial because muscle growth is far slower than fat loss. I want to give you some perspective on the difference. A lot of people have the potential to lose anywhere between 6 and 12 pounds during a 12-week cut, so over 3 months. This can take their physique from average to how the hell did you do that and can you please teach me? When a client is already lean, 3 months may actually be the maximum amount of time I'd want to keep them in a cutting phase. On the other hand, 3 months is the bare minimum that I usually recommend in a bulking phase. Therefore, the longer you can bulk for without gaining excess body fat. On the other hand, 3 months is the bare minimum I usually recommend for a bulking phase because otherwise you're just unlikely to see any significant difference. And bare minimum is a key term because the longer you can bulk for without gaining excess body fat, the more significant the results you're going to see. Moreover, the most common reason why people want to stop bulking is that they're no longer comfortable with their appearance. Thus, if you're already too close to the maximum body weight that you're okay with, your bulk won't be as long or as productive as it could be otherwise, because you're going to want to stop sooner. For these reasons, if you're in a leaner body to begin with, thanks to a prior cut, then you have a longer runway to make more gains. Now, one reason why you do not need to cut before you bulk is because being leaner supposedly improves your partitioning ratio. This partitioning ratio is a fancy way of saying that if you bulk when you're leaner, you're primed to gain a greater percentage of muscle and a smaller percentage of fat, with the muscle to fat ratio shifting in the opposite direction the more weight that you gain and the less lean that you are. But this is a myth that was debunked or has been debunked in the evidence based fitness space in the last couple of years. You don't need to be lean in order to build a greater percentage of muscle in a bulk. You don't need to be any particular degree of leanness to bulk to begin with from a physiological perspective. I believe it's beneficial because then you're going to have a longer runway, as I said, primarily from a psychological perspective as opposed to a physiological one. Now, I've said my piece about the phase that I believe will benefit most people, that is cutting first. This begs the question, how long should you cut for? When I'm planning a client's first cut, my goal is to take them to the bottom of their comfort body weight range and then build up to or slightly above the top of that range in a surplus. This comfort body weight range is first and foremost a term that I made up, and I'm referring to a spectrum of a few pounds. Within this range, you like the look of your physique well enough, you feel well nourished, training and life performance are good, sleep is as good as it gets, and you don't have much, if any, food focus or stress around nutrition and fitness beyond what would be considered the norm for you. I'm going to use myself as a practical example. My own comfort body weight range in the past used to be between 105 and 115 pounds. For reference, I'm 5 foot tall. That's why the weight is pretty low. Now, the more weight I lost under the 105-pound mark, the greater my hunger, food focus, and irritability, and the worse my energy levels, sleep, and digestion. In addition to that, I would become more and more critical of my appearance, and my relationship with food and my body image would worsen. And these are all pretty standard consequences of being below your comfort body weight range. Therefore, at the time, I would only get leaner than 105 pounds when I wanted to achieve a very cool but also temporary physique in order to do something like a photo shoot. On the other hand, the more weight I gained above the 115-pound mark, the less confidence I had in my physique and the more uncomfortable I would get with continuing a bulking phase. As a result, I tended to start bulking at around 105 pounds, get to around 118 pounds in a surplus, and then I would cut down to 105 again. Interestingly, I weighed around 100 to 101 pounds by the end of my very first cut back in 2018. But while I was below that comfort body weight range that I've just mentioned, I was below the 105-pound mark, I wasn't struggling like I would from 2021 onwards when achieving such a low body weight. Here's why. In 2018, after that first cut, I was in a smaller body, but I wasn't lean. I had less muscle and I had more fat at that weight of around 100 to 101 pounds than I did 3 years later in 2021. So while I've been referring to this range as comfort body weight range, the reason why you may incur negative side effects when you go below it is that you carry too little body fat, not that your weight is too low. I simply prefer the term body weight range as opposed to body fat range because there's no particularly accurate way of measuring body fat, a topic that at this point I've discussed in two different podcast interviews so far, one with most recently Dr. Scott Stevenson. So there's no particularly accurate way of measuring body fats, but on the other hand, We're all familiar with stepping on a scale and letting that number dictate our mood for the rest of the day. Cue awkward laughter. Ha! Anyway, let's get back to my story. After that initial cut in 2018, my first bulk lasted a year and a half after the initial 6 months of spinning my wheels that I talked to you about. And throughout this time, I built up to 118 pounds, and then I dieted down to 102 to 103 pounds for my first photo shoot between October 2020 and April 2021. At the moment, as of May 2025, I'm bulking again, and I'm currently averaging between 116 and 117 pounds. But I have built so much more muscle over the last 7 years that my muscle to fat ratio at this body weight has completely changed compared to the past. When I started bodybuilding in 2018, at the very beginning, day one of my first cut, I weighed 114.6 pounds, but I carried more body fat than muscle than I do now at a slightly heavier body weight. And you can see pictures of me on my Instagram. I've recently put up a post where I compare that starting point in 2018 to where I'm at now. And visual difference is quite striking, if I can say so myself. I'm not only telling you all this so that I can toot my own horn, it's also because what I want to say is don't be surprised if your own comfort body weight range shifts upwards as the years go by. You are gaining more muscle, which means you're going to look leaner at a higher body weight than you used to. Case in point, before bodybuilding, my comfort body weight range started lower than 105 pounds. Otherwise, I would have felt way worse at around 100 to 101 pounds, which was the end of my first cut. But then it shifted upwards to 105 to 115 pounds from 2021 onwards because I gained more muscle. And now I'm pretty confident I've gained more muscle since 2021 as well. And I believe, or I hypothesize at the very least, that my body weight, my comfort body weight range might have shifted upwards by another couple of pounds, perhaps. At the very least, I'm very curious to find out if any change has occurred as I continue cycling through bulking and cutting phases. Dear listeners, we're getting close to wrapping up the podcast. I do want to make an important point now. At the beginning of the podcast, I said that most people will likely benefit from cutting first, but most people is not everyone. While the majority of my clients do benefit from starting their coaching experience with a cut, I've had a handful for whom bulking was a far more appropriate option. And these clients who benefit more from bulking first usually share at least one of these two characteristics. They're in a body that they consider skinny. They usually use that term to define their body. And or they have a restrictive eating disorder or disordered eating in their background. If you're using a negative term like skinny to define your own body, clearly you don't feel good about it. So cutting first is going to make you feel even skinny. Furthermore, at such a low body fat level that you're already at, you already have plenty of runway to gain muscle and bulk for a long time. So trying to get any more runway would just be redundant and delay your growth for no reason. Last but not least, if you've had a restrictive relationship with food in the past and you're still in a very small body as a result of that, you might be below the lower end of your comfort body weight range. In this case, bulking won't only help you build muscle, it will help you feel healthier, happier, and more energetic. And I want to use my amazing client Elijah as an example here. Before we started working together, Elijah had already recovered from anorexia nervosa. But at the time of his first consultation with me, back in December 2023, his body fat level was still so low that he told me he was struggling to sleep. He suffered from brain fog, and he had a lot of food fears and body image challenges still lying around. He was still very self-critical of his own body on a regular basis. And it was only through an extended bulk, which, by the way, is still in progress to this day after a year and a half, and the gains just keep coming. It was only through that extended bulk that, in his own words, he's now returned to his pre-anorexia peppy self. And I simply cannot tell you how much he warmed my heart when we got on a check-in call and he told me these exact words. He told me, "This is the happiest I have ever been in my body." But before I get sappy here, I want to end the podcast with talking a little bit to the people for whom this isn't the first rodeo. If you've already been cutting and bulking for some time, but now you're uncertain about the next step to take in your physique development process, then I have a little surprise for you. I've recently created a quiz which has 9 multiple choice questions, and it's going to help you find out what may be the best goal for you to focus on right now. As a bonus, once you get the results, you also get a link to a free guide to make the most of whatever the result may be, whether it's cutting, bulking, or building muscle at maintenance, which is the third option contemplated in the quiz. You'll find the link in the show notes below. If you try it, I would love for you to let me know how you find it. It's the very first time I've used this software to create a quiz, and I'm really curious as to your experience. I've already beta tested it myself, so I know it works, but I'm really curious to hear what you think of it. In closing, what now, dear listeners? Once you've made your decision, I have some free resources to help you set up a successful cutting or bulking phase. If you decide to cut first, then you want to listen to the first 4 episodes, episodes 1 through to episode 4, part 1 and 2 of this very podcast. That's my No Quit Kit 4-part series on fat loss, which is going to cover all of the bases you need to know to nail your first cut. For bulking, tune into my 2-part guide, which I released more recently, and you'll find it in episodes 139 and 140, 139 and 140. Last but not least, if you want to get far better results than you could on your own, then you're going to love my one-on-one coaching service, and you can apply for it using the show notes below, or the link in the show notes below. Also, no offense when I say that you're going to get better results with me than on your own, but I am what you'd call a bit of an expert here. With that, thank you very much for listening. Happy gains, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.